Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. Trump claimed a uranium victory today, but not against Iran. We're learning the U.S. actually seized enriched uranium from Venezuela. The real problem? Iran's sitting on more than 12 times that amount. Layla Nazari is our Middle East correspondent. Layla, what does this actually tell us about where things stand with Tehran?
Yeah, Emma, and this is the frustration in a nutshell. The administration's trumpeting this 13.5 kilogram seizure from Caracas, right? But Tehran controls 408 kilograms. So we're talking about removing roughly 3% of the problem while claiming momentum. What I'm hearing from officials is that they're essentially grasping for any negotiating leverage they can find. And Venezuela's reactor was low-hanging fruit compared to actually confronting Iran's enrichment program directly.
But the White House keeps saying a ceasefire's still on the table. How real is that after the latest Iranian attacks?
Look, Secretary Rubio says they're expecting Iran's formal response on Friday, which tells you talks are still happening at some level. But here's what's significant. The violence hasn't stopped, the messaging from Trump keeps shifting, and frankly, each side's actions are contradicting the other's words about good faith. You can't sustain negotiations when your opponent's seizing your tankers, and you're not sure whether your president's serious about a deal or just trying to appear tough before the next headline cycle.
Americans are losing patience with this. Where does it end?
That's the question nobody in Washington can answer right now. And that's why 58% of voters are unhappy with how Trump's handling this. They sense the same thing I'm sensing. There's no clear strategy, just escalation and backpedaling in real time.
Layla Nazari, thanks. Still on world affairs, Iran's military is drawing a line tonight over its shipping in the Persian Gulf. The IRGC warning the U.S. not to interfere with Iranian commercial vessels, threatening to strike American military bases if it does. This happening while a ceasefire between Washington and Tehran technically holds, but Israeli bombs are falling on Lebanon, 24 dead in recent strikes. What we're watching here is a system under pressure at multiple points, and the question is whether any single miscalculation tips the entire region toward war. Remaining with world, the ceasefire in Lebanon is falling apart. Israeli strikes killed at least 39 people yesterday, and frankly, both sides are blaming each other. Layla rejoins me now. Layla, is this ceasefire already dead?
Yeah, Emma, look, what I'm hearing from sources on the ground is that the ceasefire was fragile from day one. Neither side actually has an incentive right now to hold the line. Israel says it's responding to Hezbollah attacks on Israeli troops. Hezbollah says Israel broke the agreement first. The mechanics of enforcement, they just don't exist.
So how does this escalate from here?
Well, if either side absorbs a high-casualty attack, we could see a return to the kind of sustained bombardment we saw months ago. And frankly, Emma, the regional implications are serious. This isn't just about Lebanon anymore. It's about whether any U.S. brokered agreement in the Middle East actually holds weight. That matters from the Persian Gulf to Syria.
Layla, thank you. Still on world, Vladimir Putin saying the Ukraine war is heading to an end. But here's what's really happening. Both sides are accusing each other of breaking a ceasefire even as we speak. Our defense correspondent Marcus Webb has been tracking this. Marcus, what's Putin's game here?
Yeah, Emma, and this is significant because the timing matters enormously. Putin makes this war's-ending statement right in the middle of a 3-day ceasefire, right while both armies are reportedly violating it. I was speaking to a former NATO analyst this morning who told me this looks less like genuine peace overtures and more like Putin trying to shape the narrative while Russia still holds military momentum. The fact that he's now willing to meet Zelensky in a third country, that's new language. But the actions on the ground tell a different story.
So he's talking peace while fighting continues?
Exactly. And what's striking is the parade itself. Red Square, no tanks, no missile systems on display. That's either confidence or, frankly, it's covering for the fact that Russia's lost significant capability. Either way, Putin's trying to project strength while simultaneously suggesting negotiations are possible. It's a both and strategy, Emma.
Marcus, thank you. The U.S. military footprint in Europe is about to shift dramatically. Trump's now saying American troops could leave Germany and head to Poland instead. And still with Marcus. What's driving this decision right now?
Yeah, Emma, this isn't just about moving soldiers on a map. What's happening here is Trump is essentially punishing Germany for what he sees as years of underfunding their own defense. Poland, on the other hand, has been spending aggressively modernizing their military, and frankly, they're playing to Trump's view that NATO members need to pull their weight. I was speaking to a source close to the White House this morning, and the message is crystal clear. Cooperate on defense spending, or lose your strategic positioning.
So, what's Berlin doing about it?
Look, Germany's in damage control mode. Their defense minister is heading to Washington soon to try to smooth things over after Merz and Trump had that very public falling out. But here's what's significant. Instead of just trying to patch things up diplomatically, Berlin's also writing checks. They want Tomahawk missiles, American cruise missiles. It's essentially Germany saying, we'll buy our way back into relevance if we can't keep the troops.
This is reshaping Europe pretty fast.
It really is, and here's what we're watching. Whether this becomes a permanent realignment or whether Germany can negotiate its way back into Trump's good graces. But the direction is clear. Poland's ascending, Germany's on the defensive.
Farmers across Asia are walking away from their fields right now. Fuel costs are too high, fertilizers impossible to afford, and half a world away, oil tankers can't move through the Persian Gulf. Our Asia correspondent James Chen is tracking how one conflict is triggering two catastrophes. James, how bad is this getting on the ground?
Yeah, Emma. And what's striking is the speed of this. I was speaking with agricultural economists this morning who said farmers in Thailand aren't just delaying planting, they're making permanent decisions about whether they can stay in farming at all. The math is brutal. Diesel's up, fertilizer's up, and they're looking at crop prices that won't cover input costs. So they're sitting out entire seasons, which means, and this is the part that surprised me, we're looking at genuine supply shocks rolling into next year.
But the oil blockade is making all of that worse, right?
It's making it exponentially worse. The Strait of Hormuz is essentially throttled right now. Nearly 1 billion barrels of oil already offline. And here's what matters. That's not just an energy problem, Emma. Fertilizer is made from petroleum, fuel to run tractors, to transport crops. It all traces back to that strait. You're watching a single conflict collapse multiple supply chains simultaneously.
James, appreciate it. Australia's political establishment just got disrupted in a major way. A far-right populist party has claimed its first seat in the lower house, and it's forcing mainstream politicians to ask uncomfortable questions about coalition options. We're learning tonight that the implications could reshape Australian politics heading into the next federal election. Alex Park, our technology correspondent, is following this. Alex, break down what just happened in this by-election and why One Nation's win matters so much.
Yeah, Emma. So One Nation didn't just win, they actually outperformed the traditional centre-right parties combined in Farah. What's significant here is this demolishes the conventional wisdom that Australia's voting system makes it nearly impossible for protest parties to break through at the federal level. I was speaking to a political analyst this morning who described it as a structural shift. And frankly, Emma, that's not language people use lightly about Australian politics.
So if One Nation keeps gaining seats, what does that mean for how Australia actually gets governed?
Look, it potentially means a hung parliament in the next federal election. And if that happens, One Nation becomes kingmaker. Neither Labour nor the coalition wants to admit they'd negotiate with Hanson's party, but the math might leave them no choice. They're facing voters in regional areas who feel genuinely left behind, and One Nation's tapping into that. The traditional parties can't just dismiss this anymore.
Alex, appreciate it. In the United States tonight, the Trump administration's tariff strategy is in chaos. Courts are blocking his policies. European automakers are bleeding money. And now he's threatening to jack up levies even higher. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, is tracking the moving pieces. Sophia, why does the president keep having to rewrite these tariffs?
Yeah, Emma, and that's the core problem here. What we're seeing is the courts are simply saying no to the legal foundation. Multiple tariff orders have been declared illegal, which forces the White House to go back and restructure them. But here's what's really striking. They keep trying the same approach, getting shot down, and then trying again. It's creating this whiplash effect where businesses literally can't plan.
So what's he threatening now?
Look, 25% on European cars if the EU won't do what he wants. That's massive. European automakers have already taken an €8 billion hit from current tariffs. I was speaking to a trade analyst this morning who told me that another round at that level would trigger immediate retaliation from Brussels. We're talking potential tariffs on American agriculture, tech. It could spiral quickly.
Does the threat actually hold weight?
That's the question, Emma, and honestly, it's unclear. The pattern we're watching is one where he uses these threats as leverage in negotiations, but the legal problems keep constraining what he can actually implement. So is it real or is it pressure? Right now, nobody knows for certain. That uncertainty alone is damaging to business confidence.
Sophia, thanks for breaking that down. In the United States, Donald Trump walked into a Manhattan courtroom today and pleaded not guilty to all 34 felony counts against him. The first time a former president has faced criminal charges on this scale. We're talking about alleged falsification of business records connected to hush money payments from 2016. The stakes? If convicted on any count, Trump could face prison time, which would fundamentally reshape the 2024 presidential race. His legal team says this is political persecution. Prosecutors say the evidence is solid and the law is clear. The trial is expected to begin within months, and legal experts say this case could be litigated in courts for years. The artificial intelligence boom is draining resources, literally. A data center in Georgia burned through 30 million gallons of water unnoticed. And tonight, we're learning how fast this problem is spreading. And James is back with us. James, how does a facility that massive operate completely under the radar?
Yeah, Emma, and that's the thing that struck me most about this. The data center had 2 completely unauthorized water connections. The utility didn't catch it until residents started calling about low water pressure. What's happening here is the infrastructure monitoring systems just weren't built for this scale of demand. Nobody was watching.
So this is a nationwide problem, not just Georgia?
It absolutely is. Look, Kazakhstan just committed nearly $2 billion to become an AI data center hub. But here's what's significant, Emma. They're running into immediate power shortages that could delay the entire project. The same resource constraint playing out in Georgia is hitting countries trying to compete globally. You've got demand outpacing infrastructure everywhere.
So what's the solution here?
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
Three people are dead, dozens are sick, and passengers from a virus-stricken Antarctic cruise ship have already scattered across the globe, potentially carrying hantavirus with them, before authorities even understood the full scale of what they were dealing with. The MV Hondius has now docked in the Canary Islands. Germany, France, Belgium, Ireland, and the Netherlands have all scrambled evacuation flights, and contact tracing is now underway internationally. And yet, here's what nobody wants to say out loud. We've known about hantavirus for decades. It kills between 35 and 50% of those who develop severe symptoms, and there is still no approved vaccine or treatment anywhere in the world. Joining me now are Alex Park, our technology and science analyst, and Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst. Alex, let me start with you. Is this a genuine systemic failure, or is this just the unavoidable chaos of a novel outbreak in a difficult environment?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be very clear about what we're actually looking at here. This is not a novel outbreak. Hantavirus is not some mysterious disease X that emerged from a jungle last Tuesday. It's been killing people in South America for decades. Argentina is consistently ranked by the WHO as having the highest incidence of hantavirus in the entire region. We've had time, we've had the science, we've had the resources, particularly after COVID-19, when the entire world agreed that pandemic preparedness was the defining challenge of our era. And yet somehow, in 2026, a Dutch tourist visits a rat-infested landfill in Ushuaia, boards a cruise ship, and there is not a single approved vaccine, not a single licensed antiviral treatment that doctors can reach for. Douglas Murray talks about the West's habit of outsourcing its thinking to supranational bodies and then acting surprised when they fail. Well, here it is in real time. The WHO, the CDC, the European health agencies, they had decades to prioritize this. They didn't, because the people dying were mostly rural South Americans, not Europeans. And now Europeans are dying, and suddenly there are evacuation planes in the air. That tells you everything about how global health priority setting actually works.
But, Alex, devil's advocate here, isn't this exactly what international cooperation is supposed to look like? Spain authorized the docking, the WHO signed off, European nations coordinated evacuations. Isn't that the system working, even if imperfectly? And Marcus, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I want to give credit where it's due. The evacuation logistics are genuinely impressive. Getting Germany, France, Belgium, Ireland, and the Netherlands to coordinate simultaneous flights in a matter of days is not nothing. But here's what I think Alex is missing. The real scandal isn't the response. It's the intelligence failure that preceded it. Multiple passengers returned to the United States and other countries before authorities had even characterized the full outbreak. That's not a cooperation problem. That's a biosecurity screening failure at the most basic level. We spend enormous amounts of money on port security, on customs infrastructure, on international health monitoring systems, and a ship carrying a hemorrhagic fever pathogen with a 35 to 50% fatality rate in severe cases somehow disgorges its passengers across the Western world before the alarm is properly raised. The contact tracing operation now underway internationally is reactive. It should never have been necessary. And the dock workers in Santa Cruz who staged protests when the ship's docking location was announced? Those people had legitimate concerns, and they were overridden by a bureaucratic agreement with the WHO before the transmission picture was fully clear.
I hear what Marcus is saying about biosecurity screening, but with respect, that misses the point entirely about where the deeper failure lies. Yes, the screening failed, but why did it fail? Because nobody built adequate surveillance protocols for hantavirus in the first place. You can't screen effectively for a threat you haven't adequately characterized and resourced. The Breitbart reporting on Patient Zero is instructive here. A man from a Dutch village visits a rat-infested landfill at the southern tip of Argentina. That's a known high-risk vector. Argentina is a known hantavirus hotspot, and yet there was no protocol, no alert system, no early warning that caught this. This is what happens when you build a global health architecture around political optics rather than scientific risk assessment. Ben Shapiro has made this argument relentlessly. The health bureaucracy can't prioritize because it's structurally political, and it costs lives. 3 so far. We don't know yet how many more.
Here's what I want to know. We're now looking at passengers scattered across Europe and North America, an incubation period of potentially up to 5 weeks, and no approved treatment. Marcus, where do you see this going? What's the realistic trajectory here?
The way I see this playing out, there are really 2 scenarios that matter. The optimistic one is that the contact tracing works. Hantavirus doesn't spread person to person the way respiratory viruses do, which actually limits the secondary transmission risk significantly, and this is contained without additional clusters emerging. But the concerning scenario, and the one authorities aren't being fully transparent about, is that we won't know for another 3 to 4 weeks whether any of the passengers who flew home before the outbreak was characterized have already seeded new exposure events. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome can look like a bad flu in early stages. The risk is that GPs in Rotterdam or Pittsburgh or Dublin see a sick patient, don't think to ask about a cruise ship in the South Atlantic, and the chain extends before anyone connects the dots. That window, the next 30 days, is genuinely dangerous.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario that should keep health ministers awake at night. The WHO and the global health establishment are going to declare victory the moment the last evacuation plane lands and the case count stops rising. They will hold a press conference about unprecedented international cooperation. They will produce a report, and then absolutely nothing structural will change. The Telegraph asked directly why there is no hantavirus vaccine, and essentially got an answer that amounts to, it wasn't profitable enough, and the political urgency wasn't there. If this outbreak, 3 dead Europeans, multinational evacuations, international contact tracing, isn't enough to finally move the needle on hantavirus countermeasure development, then I genuinely don't know what will be. And the next outbreak won't politely start on a ship. It'll start somewhere, we can't contain it.
Dark assessment from both of you, and frankly a difficult one to argue with given the track record. Alex Park, Marcus Webb, thank you both. One thing seems certain tonight. There are a lot of bureaucrats in Geneva and Brussels hoping this story stays contained to the Canary Islands, because if it doesn't, the questions they'll face won't be ones they can answer with a press release. The Iran conflict is now producing some of the most dangerously mixed signals we've seen from any American administration in decades. Missiles are still flying over the Persian Gulf, oil has crashed back through $100 a barrel, and the White House can't seem to agree with itself on whether a deal is coming or whether the war is still on. This week also saw the extraordinary spectacle of the U.S. Department of Energy triumphantly announcing it had secured enriched uranium, not from Iran, which holds 408 kilograms of the stuff, but from a reactor in Caracas, Venezuela, 13.5 kilograms. Meanwhile, a tanker seizure in the Gulf of Oman shows Iran's shadow network is still very much operational. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Layla Nazari, our Middle East analyst. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this White House in control of this conflict, or are they improvising at $100 a barrel?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be honest about what we're watching here. The Trump administration launched into this conflict with genuine military force. That part was real, that part was serious. But what we're seeing now is the strategic phase, and the strategic phase is a mess. You cannot simultaneously have Marco Rubio announcing you're waiting for Iranian responses through diplomatic channels and continue trading missile fire in the Persian Gulf. Those two postures are fundamentally contradictory. Douglas Murray has been absolutely right on this for years. The West keeps making the mistake of oscillating between aggression and appeasement without ever settling on a doctrine. And right now, Washington is doing both at the same time, which is arguably worse than either. The Venezuela uranium stunt tells you everything. The administration needed a win, any win, so they grabbed 13.5 kilograms from Caracas, while Iran sits on 408 kilograms and laughs. Iran's leadership reads that as weakness dressed up as strength. And the trajectory here suggests Tehran will keep probing until they find the breaking point. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't reopen through wishful press conferences.
But Marcus, here's the counter-argument. Trump did strike Iran harder than any previous president dared. Isn't some ambiguity in negotiations actually a feature, not a bug? The madman theory of negotiation has worked before. And Layla, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Marcus is right that the mixed signals are a problem, but I think he's underselling the economic leverage dimension here, which is where I part ways with the pure military strength framing. Here's what I think Marcus is missing. Iran's shadow fleet seizure of the Ocean Khoi is not just a military story, it's a sanctions story. And it tells us the sanctions architecture is crumbling from the inside out. Iran is now seizing its own sanctioned tankers because the shadow network has become so convoluted that even Tehran can't track who's carrying what. That's a sign of pressure, real pressure. The Financial Times poll showing 58% of Americans dissatisfied with Trump's handling should be a wake call not to escalate further militarily, but to press harder economically. Oil above $100 hurts Iran's buyers, China, India, Turkey, and it hurts them just as much as it hurts us. If you structurally enforce secondary sanctions on every nation purchasing Iranian crude, you don't need to fire another missile.
I hear what Layla is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. We have been sanctioning Iran for 20 years. 20 years of sanctions, and they have 408 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. They have ballistic missiles that can reach U.S. assets across the Persian Gulf. They have a shadow fleet that apparently even they can't fully control, but which keeps moving their oil regardless. The idea that tightening sanctions is the answer at this stage is like recommending a diet to someone who's already in cardiac arrest. The time for sanctions as a primary tool was before Iran reached this level of nuclear capability. National Review is right to question whether the intelligence on Iran's capabilities is credible, and if those capabilities are being underestimated, then the economic approach Layla is advocating is dangerously insufficient. You don't deter a near-nuclear state with tariffs and secondary sanctions. You deter it with credible, overwhelming force and the political will to use it.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that keeps me up at night. If Iran calls Trump's bluff and the ceasefire collapses completely, does America have the political stomach for what comes next? Layla, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, the next 30 days are genuinely decisive. Iran's response to Rubio's diplomatic channel will tell us everything. If Tehran sends back a maximalist position, full sanctions relief, guaranteed non-interference, Trump faces an impossible choice. He can't accept those terms without appearing to have lost, and he can't reject them without re-escalating into a conflict where 58% of his own voters are already dissatisfied. If current trends continue, I think you see a de facto frozen conflict, ongoing low-level exchanges in the Persian Gulf, oil stubbornly above $90 to $100, and both sides telling their domestic audiences they won. That's not victory. That's exhaustion dressed up as statesmanship.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. The intelligence on Iran's nuclear capabilities is being questioned right now for a reason. If those assessments are wrong in the optimistic direction, if Iran is closer to a deployable nuclear device than the current picture suggests, then every week this conflict drags on without resolution is a week Iran uses to protect and advance that program. History tells us that nuclear thresholds, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. The real risk here is not that Trump escalates, it's that he negotiates a deal, declares victory, withdraws pressure, and 18 months from now, we discover Iran used the diplomatic window to complete what they started. That is the nightmare scenario. And the mixed signals coming out of this White House right now are making that scenario more likely, not less.
Marcus Webb, Layla Nazari, genuinely illuminating, genuinely alarming. When the best-case scenario is a frozen conflict and the worst case involves a nuclear threshold, you have to wonder whether anyone in Washington fully understands what game they're actually playing, because Tehran certainly does.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.